In this chapter, you will embark on an exciting project that enables users to engage in captivating conversations with influential figures such as Einstein, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and many others. This project offers users an immersive experience where they can role-play and have real-time conversations with these personalities. Let's explore the final project and witness its functionality. Initially, the user chooses a personality they wish to interact with. Once selected, the user can send messages of their choice, and the chosen personality will respond using first-person dialogue, creating the illusion of a genuine conversation between the user and the personality they have selected. So if I say hi to Bill Gates, it's going to answer, "Hello, I'm Bill Gates. How can I assist you today?" And any question or message I send to that personality is going to respond based on the fact that they are actually Bill Gates. So get ready to experience this unique and engaging chatbot project, which we are going to build starting from the next video. In this video, you're going to start building the user interface of this project. So to save time, we're going to start from the chat example we built earlier, and then we're going to change it as needed to reach the final project. First, I'm going to get code from the server.js file we built earlier for the chat example and paste it into our server.js file. Then I'm going to make changes to this file later. Then I'm going to go to the front end and go to the screens and then create a new folder for our project and call it Chatbot. And then inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file, chatbot.js, and another folder for the styling, style, and inside it, style.js. .css, sorry. So now I'm going to import the code for chatbot.js from the chat example we built earlier. I'm going to do this to save time. So we're going to amend this code for our project. And then we're going to change the component to chatbot. And finally, I'm going to go to the app.js and add the root for our project. So the root is going to be chatbot, and the element we're going to be using is the chatbot components, and it's been imported automatically. All right. Now if I go to localhost 3004/chatbots, I'll get the chat example we built earlier using the chat API. So let's test it and make sure that everything works. So it is working as expected. So what I'm going to do right now is change the layout of this web page to match the final project. So the layout of the final project is made of a couple of elements. So we've got an element with a height that spans over the height of the web page, meaning 100 VH. And then we've got the JSON object, which we placed right there after that element occupying the full height of the viewport. The first element is going to be a vertical flexbox, which will contain the personalities box, the input box or the form box, which will take up any space they need, and then the chat container will occupy any space left after these two elements take their space needed. So if the chat container has got more content than the available space, it's going to scroll. So we're going to give it an overflow property. So let's go ahead and change our existing code. So we're going to have a div which will wrap the two elements. So the first element is going to be our flexbox. So a div of class dflex. And then the second element is going to be our JSON content or our JSON box. So the form is going to go inside the first Flexbox. And then before the form, we're going to have the personalities div. And after that, we're going to have the task container. So again, the personalities div is going to take up any space it needs. The form will also take up any space it needs. And this middle div is going to take up any remaining space. And it's going to overflow if its content is bigger than the available space. And after that Flexbox, we're going to have our JSON box. So let's place these elements for now inside the chat container, which is the middle div. And instead of checking response OK, I'm just going to check JResults to show the results box. So let's go ahead and add any classes that we need for these elements. So the first Flexbox is going to be a vertical Flexbox. So we're going to give it a class flex column to make it vertical. Also, it's going to occupy the full height of the viewports. So I'm going to give it a class chat page. And then I'm going to go to the style file and style that class by setting the height to 100 VH. Now let's move to the personalities div. As you can see, it doesn't occupy the full width of the web page. So I'm going to give it a class container. And then I'm going to add this heading and then the images. So let's give it an ID first. Personalities. And inside it, I'm going to have a heading. Now the value inside the heading will depend on whether we have selected a character or not. So before selecting a character, it's going to show, please select a character. Once we select a character, it says you are chatting with. So we're going to do that with a state, which I'm going to call selected option. So if selected option, then we're going to say you are chatting with. Otherwise, we will say, please select a character. And let's create this at the top. Then we are going to have the div where we have all the options to select from. And I'm going to build that div later. The following element inside our Flexbox is the chat container. So I'm going to give it an ID, chat container. And since it occupies any remaining space after the other two elements inside our Flexbox take up any space they need, I'm going to give it a class name, flexfill. So this means it's going to fill up any remaining space. And also to have the scrolling feature, I'm going to give it overflow auto. And inside the chat container, we're going to show all the messages like this. So message 1, message 2, and so on. So let's save this and see how our page looks at the moment. So we've got our personalities box, we've got the messages box, and we've got our form. right at the bottom. Now let's center the content inside the personalities box using the class text center. And it looks like it centered the messages as well, and that's not exactly what I wanted. So instead of doing that in the wrapping div, I'm going to do that only in the personalities div. So I'm going to add a class text center right there, and that looks better. Alright, in the next video you are going to create a messages array where you're going to store all the messages and then use that array to display all the messages in the chat container. In this video, you are going to create a messages state which you're going to use to manage all the messages sent by the user and the messages received back from the server. So the messages state is going to be an array where we're going to place all the messages. First, I'm going to define the messages state right here. So the variable is going to be called messages. And I'm going to initialize this array to a first array made of one element, which is going to be the context. So the context is going to have a role set to system and a content that I'm going to set to something like you are an assistant. So this is going to be the first element in our messages array. And whenever the user sends a message, we're going to append that message to that array. Now let's move to the handle submit function. First, we will only send a request to the server if there is a user message. So send a request to the server only if there is a user message. So if there is no input, we will just ignore the user submission. So if there is an input, so I could trim this by removing the trailing spaces. So if this is different from an empty string, then we're going to run some code. So we're going to have a try catch statement. So first of all, I'm going to add the user message to the messages array. So to do this, I'm going to define a constant. I'm going to call it updated messages, which I'm going to set to the messages array followed by the new message sent by the user. So I'm going to wrap that inside an object, again with a role and content. So the role this time is going to be user, and the content is going to be the input message or the input value. Now I could change the input value to input message just to make things better to read. So let's change the state to input message. So the content is going to be the input message. And I'm going to go to the form and change the input value to input message as well. All right. Now, after adding the user message to the messages array, we saw that inside updated messages. And then after that, I'm going to set the message array or the messages array to updated messages. And then after that, I'm going to send a request to the server and store the output inside a variable response. So I'm going to use Axios.post, and we're sending a request to /API/chatbot. So I'm going to go to the server.js and change the root to /chatbot. And then after the root, I'm going to send an object with a property messages set to updated messages. Now it's very important to use the updated messages rather than the messages value, because the messages value will not update until the next cycle. So that's really important. If you send messages here, it's not going to work. So it's very important to note this. Then after that, I'm going to store the output inside a variable server response, which I'm going to set to response.data. Now let's change the server.js file. This time we are sending a messages parameter, not a text parameter. So I'm going to change text to messages. And then when we send the request to the OpenAI API, I'm going to need to change the messages value, as this time we're not using any prompt. So the run completion method is going to take this time a messages array and will set messages to messages like this. Or to simplify, because we're using the same name of the property, just like this. And once we get the messages value from the request body, we will call the function run completion like this. Also, I'm going to simplify the catch statement. So I will keep this line where we send a JSON with a status, like this. And before that, I'm going to console.log something or console.error something in the backend, saying an error occurred, followed by the error variable. So let's save and go back to the front end. So now we sent a request to the server after adding the user message to the messages array. Now, after getting a response back from the server, you're going to add the server response this time to the messages array. So to do this, I'm going to create another variable, just like I did there. And we're going to call it updated messages 2. So this variable is going to be set to the value of updated messages, followed by the server response. So this time the server response will have a role assistant, and then we're going to get the content from the server response .data.choices, the first choice, .message.content. That's where we get the content of the response from. So, and then I'm going to set the set messages to update messages, or updated messages instead. Okay, now after that, I'm going to update the JSON objects or the JSON results with the updated messages array. I'm going to set JResult to JSON.stringify the updated messages to, and I'm going to pass the parameters as I did previously. So once we catch the error, I'm going to console.log an error occurred, followed by the error variable. And also I'm going to set the error state to something like an error occurred. You can change this as you like. So let's save. It looks like I missed a 2 there. I'll be setting the messages to the new value after adding the response to the messages array. So now if we do this and try our code, we will not see anything happening on the front end as we're not updating the messages box or the chat container box. So before doing that, I'm just going to console.log the new value of the messages array, which is supposed to be updated messages to. Also, I will need to import Axios, as we're using Axios this time to send the request to the server. So import Axios from Axios. And let's just check if we've got any input message or input value still in our code. So we don't need this request anymore. And I'm going to delete that. As we've already created our own try and catch statement. So let's save and try our code. Let's send a first message, hi. And here is our updated messages array. So as we've seen in the code, we've got the first element defining the context, then that's the message sent by the user, and then that's the message received back from the server. If I send another message, then I'm going to get the new value, which is the previous one, followed by the message sent by the user and the new response received back from the server. All right, so our code is working.